Pam, we have, of course, a number of different configurations of the Lumen Photon pads, all the way from small pads that'll cover your eyes to boots to large pads that'll cover your whole spine. They're amazing. And the thing is, you don't need to buy new supplies. As long as you keep the pads and protect the wires and don't treat them roughly, the Lumen lights literally will penetrate through 12 inches of human tissue, bone, ligament, muscle, brain, bowels, everything. And it stimulates what's called tissue entrainment. Now, what that means is when you put pulse light that's on a specific pulsing frequency, it deals with what's called the tissue ontogeny. In other words, ectoderm or skin and neuroectoderm, meaning brain and nervous system, operates on frequency number 3 on the settings of the machine. Frequency number 4 is internal organs like liver, kidneys, spleen, etc., and heart. And frequency number 5 is primarily for endocrine organs like thyroid, adrenals, etc. Adrenals sit on top of your kidneys, testicles for males or ovaries for females. All the internal organs, basically, that's how it works. So what I see happening, well, that's funny. What I see happening is a remarkable issue of how carrier frequencies do that. Now, what we're trying to do is have a little input jack from our audio input jack, and I just got a new device that we arrived from LUMEN. And this is an antenna about 10 inches around with a mini amp, and you simply can take your jack from your audio output from your, say, MP3 player, and our sound, which are frequency sound, or MP3s for the different resonant frequencies of the molecular weight of the minerals that we're trying to open the ion channels and bring them into cells and tissues. And you can just play that. Now, if you can do the same thing with microcurrent, you can do the same thing with a Rife machine. The nice thing about Lumen is because the primary energy that's transferred through the cells and tissues is your light body. And the light body is infrared. It's the vibration of molecules in solution are in the infrared light spectra. So if you could actually look at someone with a digital thermography from their skin, you'd actually see that that's where their disease is. So I'm certified in thermographic evaluations, and I had a Flexitherm digital machine as well as a digital camera system in my office in Denver. So you could actually look at somebody's illness. If they had a neuritic pain syndrome, I could look at it with a digital thermographic camera that would detect up to 100th degree difference in temperature, 100th of a second. And then I could also then do a scan, called an axon 2 scan, that would look at their ADL and C fibers and tell you precisely down to the spinal or peripheral nerve causing their pain, or the underlying tissue problems such as cancer, autoimmune disease, etc. Now, the nice thing about Lumen Photon is you don't need to fiddle with it. You just slap it over the sore body part, or the part that needs to be regenerated in stem cells, or the part that needs production of nitric oxide to improve circulation, or the part that needs to be detoxified, and just turn it on. It's amazing. You don't need to fiddle with it. That's what's neat about Lumen. Tell us some more features about Lumen pads that you particularly like.
Well, I like that they're flexible and that you can, if you need to kind of put it around a joint, so you can get, even though it penetrates really, really deeply, it also feels really good when you have an injury and an issue that you're treating. So the lights feel great when you wrap them around a joint or injury, and you get sort of that 360 action, which is really nice.
Now, I need the contact for your engineers. If you can email it to me, I'll send them the information I have now from my electronic engineers and LUMEN. Because
yes, I will do that.
If they simply have an ear jack, a 3.5 or 2.5 ear jack, that brings an audio input into the Lumen, when the on phase of the lights, that's when a fraction of a second the light's on, it can resonantly vibrate at that light frequency for the harmonic resonancy of the particular minerals. Now, I'm going to explain how light works. All living things do what's called tissue entrainment, which means, and I'll use the analogy that was discovered several hundred years ago. They discovered when they're building bridges in Edinburgh, Scotland, that if you have soldiers march over the bridge in step, that they can literally pull the bridge apart and the rivets will pop. So you create what's called giant waves. And a giant wave is created when you actually have a harmonic resonant frequency that builds on itself and continues to build. Nikola Tesla, when he was doing his research in this lab in Manhattan back around a century ago, actually had little devices small enough he could put it in his lab coat pocket that he could attach to a pillar of a building. It would hit a pulse to that pillar, and then hear an echo back, and then it would lock onto what's called a resonant frequency for that particular structure. Now, I'll explain how this works even for earthquakes. If one building falls and the building right beside it doesn't fall, it's because there's frequencies in the building that fell that are identical to the resonant frequencies in the earthquake that's coming, that's happening. If there's no resonant frequencies that match in the building beside it, the building won't create giant waves and it won't rip the building apart and make it fall. Isn't that interesting? Now,
it's very interesting.
This also explains how noise-canceling headphones and the use of telluric currents could be used to stop all earthquakes. And I've proposed this before, so I've asked engineers. One of the things that I put out a challenge, and I find very few people actually have the nerve or the guts to actually challenge me, and I've said this before, people find it pretty fantastic, but it's true, that if you present me with any problem in any area of science, politics, medicine, or whatever, I will provide you an instant answer or a framework to find the answer of any problem on Earth. Okay? That's a pretty big challenge. Now,
it is.
It is. But when people challenge me, and I say, look, if you want to stop earthquakes in California, and we want to find primary water, and if you want to protect the Earth from gravity waves from deep space, you create a Dyson sphere with specific ways of actually deflecting gravity waves, which I know how to do. If you don't do these things and collaborate with other scientists and technicians and space engineers, you're not going to have the problems. Right now what we're doing is we're experimenting with the population. I remember reading a book many years ago. At the time, I think it was 200 million guinea pigs. That's when the population of the U.S. was just over 200 million. Now we're 325 million or 27 million guinea pigs. And we're doing things like smart meters and Wi-Fi networks, because think of it this way. Think of a smart meter as a little cyber bird chirping at a resonant frequency, chirp, 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 but they're all in cadence. In other words, if you had 200 billion little birds all chirping at the same frequency and cadence, you'd create giant waves that would go through the electrical system, the ground currents through magnetite in the ground, and the waters, because water will carry at resonant frequencies, and you'd have dirty electricity entraining all kinds of tissues and organs. And if those entraining frequencies were disruptive to cellular communication, they will affect specific ion channels and minerals. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I took care of is I took care of the employees at the Pratt & Whitney Jet Aircraft Parts Plant, and we had a serious accident back in the early 90s. And I'm like the guy Becker on that old TV show, the doctor, that if you don't tell me straight up, you can drop dead, and to hell with you. So I told the guys at the at the Pratt & Whitney plant, because they had an accidental loss of 100,000 gallons of hydrofluoric acid, and they had vapors that were causing people to vomit their guts up and burn the hell out of their lungs and get serious chemical skin burns. And I said, unless you tell me what the hell happened, I'm not going to do a damn thing. You guys can drop dead. So they told me everything, full disclosure. And I freaked out a little bit, because what they had is they had in the back of their Pratt & Whitney plant, they actually had a directed energy weapon system that was using terahertz waves, which are basically the same frequency as the terahertz scanners they use in the airport to look at soft x-rays to see if you're carrying a weapon or maybe a nail clipper that you could take over an aircraft. You know how ridiculous that is. Yeah. Or maybe some tweezers. Maybe you're going to actually tell the pilot, if you don't direct this plane, I'm going to tweeze your nasal hairs or something. I don't know. So anyway, the terahertz waves were tuned to a frequency of a specific chromosome 16, so it would cause the release of peroxisomes and lysosomes. So if you're hit by this wave, by this collimated beam that was put on the Abrams tank or the Apache helicopter, that could shoot up to 4 or 5 miles away, and it would go through the side of a building, a jet aircraft, or whatever, a cave. And if it hit you, the first few minutes, you barf your guts up, then you start getting extremely dizzy and couldn't stand up. And then what would happen is you'd start having disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, start bleeding, and there's cardiac arrest, and your tissues would liquefy within a half an hour after you're arrested. Okay?
That's terrifying.
Now, people need to know Dr. Deagle has skill sets that are way beyond the normal. And I have a photographic memory. I'm like Mike Ross from Suits, okay? You do not expose me to stuff and not think I'm going to do Vulcan mind meld and figure out what the hell you're doing. Now, people say they want to see if they can duplicate me, including idiots like Alex Jones and others try to see if they can copy me. Forget it, idiots. You're not going to do it. Now, the problem is that we're doing an experiment with the human population and birds and bees. And we once had a comment by Einstein that said, when the bees go, we have 4 years. That's a comment attributed directly to Albert Einstein.
Right.
Albert he was actually a pretty funny guy besides being a pretty smart guy. And Albert basically looked at it. You remember now, the smartest people in a culture are quantum scientists and comedians, believe it or not. And then following that are there's various other people. Anyway, the point is that when you start having resonant frequencies from cell phones on the side of your head, because there's now controversy and lawsuits over whether they cause cancer,
Right.
okay, or whether they open up ion channels or disrupt things. I know that when you create a resonant frequency that's therapeutic, you're actually opening up ion channels to allow those minerals to get in, and every single enzyme in your body is a monoatomic form of a mineral catalyzing the creation or the making or breaking of a bond, which then folds the molecule and you create a structural protein or an enzyme to create a metabolite that goes through a metabolic series of intermediate changes. Now, that means every mineral is in its superconductor form, which will either make or break bonds by adding electrons to a specific thing like a pi bond or a double bond or whatever, or an allopathic bond, or create a ring molecule, etc., okay? Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is when you have, if you're using a LUMEN machine, and you could actually, in the on frequency, let's say you have a person that has diabetes, and I give you the list of, say, 5 or 6 frequencies for chromium, vanadium, selenium, zinc, copper, and magnesium and manganese. Okay, let's say I just pull those ones up, and so I have a signature pattern of which minerals are important to actually counteract and reverse which diseases. Every disease tissue has a signature of mineral deficiencies that are tied to it, and it doesn't matter if you're eating or taking those minerals in your diet. If the ion channels are locked or closed down, they're not getting in. So, for example, if your hair's turning gray, it's not that you have a total body manganese deficiency, because manganese is necessary for the pigment enzyme to make the pigment in your hair. It means that your ion channels are closed, so you're not going to absorb those minerals and not going to make the pigment proteins, so that you're actually going to have hair color and your hair's not going to turn gray. Do you follow? So every disease, including aging and organ dysfunction, is tied, whether there's a stealth pathogen in the tissue or a toxin or radiation effect. Every disease has a molecular signature of deficient minerals because of the shutting off of ion channels, because of the lack of telomeric biophotons to open up those ion channels. And what LUMEN does is open those channels up. Now, what I want to do is augment the carrier frequencies, like a frequency for radio and television, by putting on the on phase of the lights, which might be, a 200th of a second. But during that 200th of a second, there's resonant harmonic frequencies of light that will entrain the tissues and increase what's called the electron density of the cytochromes, and increase the chance of what's called entraining the tissue to open the ion channels. In other words, it increases what's called the signal-to-noise ratio of the telomeres. Now, every cell, and I'm going to repeat this term for people that are mathematical bent, every cell of every living thing, right down to bacteria, nanobacteria, and whatever fungi, every cell of every living thing on our planet or anywhere in the galaxy or universe is a stochastic, nonlinear, liquid crystal supercomputer. Every single cell. So if you actually could work out, and I've worked out some of the mathematics, how many calculations per picosecond do you think an average, say, skin cell is processing to be and maintain being a skin cell?
Gosh, I don't know.
I'll just give you a comparison. The amount of computing power of the entire planet, of every computer on Earth, is a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of the processing capacity of one cell in your body. All of the computers on Earth in every single system, from industrial computers to communication satellites to everything, is a tiny fraction of the computing capacity of one cell.
Wow.
Okay? Now, that not only that, all these cells act in concert, almost like an orchestra, and they have, just like we've seen birds flying in flight, and they kind of interact with each other, so they fly together, and you notice that you'll see these waves where it's like really cool. You can look at it, and you can be transfixed by watching these birds literally flying around in conjoined patterns.
Right.
Just like right now, IBM has, for example, some new Starlight drones that can do that and fly patterns up in the sky, like sparkly patterns, or put up ads in the sky, and they have a light below them. They're called a Starlight drone with a little cage around the little blades, so they can fly up, and they actually will create patterns in the sky. And you can have them also white light or different colors of light. So they're going to have drone commercials in the sky where they can put up 5,000 of these little guys, and they'll actually go up and fly a few thousand feet and create an ad in space. That's available right now. You can go online and look at it.
Wow.
Now, what I'm trying to say, I'm presenting a lecture this December. Now, people say, Dr. Deagle, you got a radio show. You don't know all this stuff. Wrong. I do the radio show to get out information on things that my colleagues wouldn't expect or don't want or going to fight against. Now, I've made a lot of discoveries, because remember, I was accepted at MIT in nuclear physics from grade 11 because I taught myself quantum mechanics. I had a special scholarship. I finished my PhD in marine molecular biology and genetics at 21 by sleeping on a lab floor, and just didn't write the thesis, but the project including writing the software, isolating the Vibrio marina superbacterium that had 10 million times more enzymatic capacity, creating the superculture, and actually synthesizing the substrate, radioactive substrate. I did it all in 5 months.
Wow. That's
and
amazing.
I went into medicine, and when I started making discoveries and asking questions to my knucklehead professors, they told me I should go in and get a PhD. I should go into pathology because they know everything. Unfortunately, all their patients are dead. Right? Now, of course, now we have the version of functional medicine, which is living pathology, so not all our patients are dead. Now, in functional medicine, we can do advanced quantum diagnostics, imaging studies, etc. What I want to do is I want to revolutionize everything I touch, not just medicine. And I want people to understand it's a way of thinking about thinking. I can take anybody, and I can raise their IQ 10 to 20 points in 2 hours by just talking about how they think about thinking and using brain exercises. You don't. This is beyond even supplements. I can give them supplements that'll increase your IQ. They talk about, this formula called Limitless. If you use a combination of our nutraceuticals right now, I can make your IQ jump dramatically and your memory capacity. And I can actually quantitatively measure the parameters, including the levels in your platelets of bioamines, a quantitative electroencephalogram, blood flow studies like SPECT blood flow, and quantitative electroencephalography, as well as PET scans to prove to you that I've done it. So it's not just like Dr. Deagle's full of shit. No, I'm not. Okay? Now, the reason why this is such an important breakthrough, if you've got a child that has autism and you do transcranial therapy to reduce BOF, or brain on fire, you're increasing the metabolic activity of the blood-brain barrier. You're producing ion channel minerals to go into those tissues to reduce what's called BOF, or brain on fire, and decrease the what's called the microglial production of peroxynitrate and hydroperoxy radical. So, for example, if you're trying to support glutathione peroxidase activity in the brain, you give them the supplements Gamma E Plus and CoQ10 ubiquinol, and some of other supplements like D-Link, like carnosine D-Link, and Nutritrala. But on the other hand, you open the ion channels using a LUMEN machine, and you stick it on the child's head, and then you put them in mild hyperbaric oxygen. All of a sudden, they go from being incomprehensible to speaking in sentences and acting rational and starting to try to interact with mommy and daddy. Now, we already can do that. We already can do this, okay? We have people who put in hyperbaric oxygen therapy, but when we add other technologies, we amplify how far and how fast you're going to get better. So if you've got a sore joint, we're going to give you Inflamax and Cell Defense Plus and Collagen Max, etc., tendon bender joint performance. But if I can slap a lumen pad on your knee, and I can put it in anti-inflammatory frequencies, and then frequencies to regenerate the glycosaminoglycan joint cartilage and the hydroviscous layer and the periarticular joint materials, which are metabolically limited because I'm increasing oxygenation, blood flow, nitric oxide production, etc. And then I can entrain the tissues to turn on the genetics to open the ion channels, because the reason why someone's got a chronic recurrent, let's say, periarticular bursitis or joint arthritis, where there's osteoarthritis, where the cytokines are increased, like nitroperoxy radical and nitric oxide, because you can actually take the synovial fluid. I worked in the synovial analysis lab in medical school 40-some years ago. You can take it out and actually look and measure levels of cytokines now, and measures of specific types of collagen. You can actually measure pathogens like Mycoplasma hominis, and you can measure the epigenetic changes. The most important thing is if you can restore the enzymatic capacity of the tissue to heal. So that's why Lumen Photon, if we add this next layer by putting a little simple jack and playing an MP3 on the on phase of the lights, we can entrain the tissues to absorb the minerals to speed the healing. Pretty cool.
It's pretty exciting.
Sites for QRMA and metapathy. It's really simple. Number one, you can do time payment now on either any of our electronic devices for testing. If you're doing a testing on your immediate relatives, the QRMA test itself, with just a few paragraphs of information, is free for you and your immediate family. Now, when you're doing a consultation for someone as a service, it's a little more involved. They need to purchase 2 time units of consultation for a QRMA and 4 to 6 time units, depending on how complex it is, for a metapathy, because I need that 11-page history form, all their medical records, imaging studies, lab work, etc. And then you can schedule the QRMA, and then you send a compressed file along with the history form, their credit cards, etc. That needs to be purchased before you even do the test. If you do that, you can charge what's a reasonable fee, say $100, $150 for doing the testing and collecting the data to make sure that that person has all the information, because literally the supercomputer is me. You send that information to me, the compressed file of the QRMA, you send me all their medical records in the 11-page intake history form, and I collate and analyze it, and I produce a report that will tell you, for that person, do they need to see a specific type of specialist, surgeon, dentist, etc., or therapist, maybe a force plate analysis of their gait to determine if they need a custom orthotic, if they need to see a surgeon, if they need to have any special types of treatment. Maybe we discover that they have a high probability on a metapathia that they have cancer, that they need cancer marker tests or imaging studies done, or see alternative cancer clinic and do gene-based cancer analysis, say at the Cambridge Laboratories of Cambridge, Massachusetts. So what I provide is extremely comprehensive. I will train other doctors eventually how to do the analysis part, but all of these tests require that you purchase consultations. 2 units for a QRMA and 4 to 6 units for a Metapathia Hunter. This is not a minor thing. This takes many hours for me to review all the tests, to review the Metapathia Hunter analysis, and then to do a specific recommendation and follow-up. So it's very involved. It may involve, we have to do conventional imaging studies, and I tell people, keep your skepticals on. If I find specific very serious problems, I'm going to want to collaborate it with conventional testing as well, imaging studies, and perhaps referrals to other doctors to do specific types of evaluation. And because it's comprehensive and functional medicine, it includes medicine, surgery, chiropractic, electromyography, toxicology, infectious disease, immunology, herbology, intermediate metabolism, quantum mechanics. It includes everything. And as they say, I can train doctors. The best way I found to train them is case by case. So, for example, I had a doctor last year in Santiago, Chile, who's wants me to his system to develop a comprehensive functional medicine wellness program. It's very simple, case by case. If you send me a case from Santiago, that person is going to pay for the specific consultation process. I will train the doctors how to analyze the data for that case. If we do, let's say, 20, 30, 40, 50 cases over a period of several years, you're going to have a data bank of how I approach some of the main complex problems: heart disease, brain dysfunction, depression, accelerated aging, vascular problems, diabetic retinopathy and neuropathies, dyslipidemias, obesity, polyorgan dysfunction such as, hyperinsulinemia, hyperglucogonemia syndrome, hypercortisolemia, which is tied to diabetes. And I'll explain this to the doctors so they know what tests to recognize. For example, most people don't realize that for every person that has typical antithyroid antibodies and the typical hypothyroidism that can evolve over 14 years, most cases of hypothyroidism are type 2, which is diabetic or insulin resistant, and there's 30 times more of those cases than there is of typical antithyroid antibodies, often triggered off by various viruses, including glandular viruses. So, and you can identify those cases by core body temperature charts and by measuring not only the free T4 and free T3, but free reverse T3, which every LabCorp and Quest can do in America. Test I brought over 36 years ago from Germany. And I'm the first to recognize this, along with Dr. Otto Huhn, the head of pathology at the University of Calgary 36 years ago. And I got persecution for it, just like I've been persecuted repeatedly for breaking paradigms that the doctors don't want to accept at the time, but later. Not only 5 years later, Dr. Ravens published Ravens syndrome at Stanford University, but also the doctors in South Africa and Johannesburg brought what's called the glucose, white bread glucose tolerance charts, which is a chart of 100 for white bread in terms of the glycemic index. That was my research years and years before. Just like the research that Dr. Hal Huggins in Colorado used to get his license back and get a state law for removal of amalgams. That was my work with Dr. Murray Vimy 34 years to 35 years ago. Okay? So, call in if you have a question. 800 to the Nutrimedical report. And, of course, so we're talking about the Lumen Photon last segments. We're going to talk about mild hyperbaric oxygen. The combination of our NutriMeds, which are very remarkable. Don't believe any idiot out there that thinks that they have equivalent supplements. And don't go and second-guess thinking. I had someone the other day say that Alex Jones is something equivalent to our Collagen Max, or someone has something equivalent to something else. They're full of it. Don't believe the damn lies. And then when we have hyperbaric oxygen therapy, this is by far some to see hyperbaric chambers are better than manufactured anywhere on planet Earth, whether it's Europe, China, whatever. These are amazing chambers with ergonomics, the largest chambers, the quietest chambers, the coolest chambers, and most affordable chambers. And so, I tell people, if you're trying to heal faster and farther and more quickly and stimulate your stem cells and turn off and detoxify the body, one of the most important things is to supply energy, and you can't have the energy without fuel supplied with oxygen that goes beyond the terminal circulation of your capillaries so that the tissues get absorption through Henry's law of oxygen. And, of course, we had an oxygen concentrator with a little ozone as well, and that makes an even greater benefit to the tissues. So welcome back, Bruce.
Thank you.
Now, your chambers have so many features, it's hard to kind of enumerate them in just one segment, but they're the best price, they're the largest, they're the most innovative. Like, you can literally roll a gurney up to one and literally zip it up to somebody who is literally on a stretcher. You can have somebody in a wheelchair wheeled up to a vertical grand dive. You have chambers tall enough you can actually put a trampoline in them and exercise. You have chambers that are horizontal. You can sleep in it. You can have two moms and a couple of kids with autism inside there to play while the child is getting oxygenated so that it turns off their BOF or brain on fire. You've got chambers where professional athletes can go in and get what we call oxygen doping. And by the way, they can never detect the fact you're taking oxygen. So, these chambers were used, I think, 2 or 3 years ago by the winning Super Bowl team from the New York Giants. And use your chambers. And I think people should also realize there really is no alternative. I looked around to see if there are other competitors, just like I look around to periodically see if there's competitors to our nutraceuticals. There isn't. Your chambers are miles ahead of anybody else. Ergonomically, larger, more comfortable, cooler, more ergonomic, more safety features, more easily repaired. Everything you can think about in a mild hyperbaric chamber, yours are superior.
And they're very unique.
Yeah.
They're so unique that we have 2 patent pendings, and we're about to add a third for a super cooling system that will have multiple cooling levels, industrial level, that you wouldn't need a refrigerator. Just put your food in the hyperbaric chamber. And then a standard level, commercial level for those with a medium to small unit that they have in their home. We just love... Go ahead.
Yeah, so, and you have every feature. I mean, the things that will make people not go in the chambers is, number one, other competitors are too small, they're hot, they're dark, they're claustrophobic, they don't tell you what's going on in terms of your pressures inside the chamber, they don't have a dual compressor system, so they don't have that backup safety, they're not easily repaired, you have to send the whole chamber back, you can't just repair it. Your chambers are superior because they're easy to repair. Everything about them is superior. And the prices are superior. Whenever the competitor brought out something, you'd bring it out at a much better price. I mean, they have chambers that are tiny, that are what we call old technology. I call pre-2000 technology. Yours are always advancing. Literally every month, every year, you're adding new things to them. And one of the things you sent me a few months ago was a music bomb, so you can actually get an MP3 player inside your chamber. And the walls of the chamber, because they're so hard, they're like harder than I call an oil drum. They actually act as a speaker amplifier, don't they?
Yes, they do. It's like the steel drums you see down in the islands. That it just gives a nice tonal quality because it's like having a speaker 6 feet by 6 feet wide.
Right.
Versus a little tiny speaker. Now, so it really adds that tone.
We were talking to Ron Klatz, and he wanted to put a combination of your hyperbaric chambers in with what's called a resonant harmonic entraining device. And I've worked out the technology now. We now have an antenna system that's under $200 that someone can actually play an MP3 to actually generate the resonant frequencies. We can play the MP3 itself, the resonant molecular frequencies, open up the ion channels, just with an MP3 player, either with a music bomb in the chamber or with the headphones on, while they're in the chamber. The neat thing about it is the hyperbaric oxygen is like literally right after you get your Nutrimeds. I strongly recommend for any serious illness like MS, rheumatoid arthritis, or an autoimmune disease, post-traumatic head injuries, previous heart attacks, post-chemotherapy recovery. There's so many conditions, chronic fatigue syndrome, people that say they have Morgellons syndrome, which is agrobacterium, anaerobic bacteria that's causing systemic anaerobic bacteria infections. You're going to heal faster, quicker, and more completely with hyperbaric oxygen than any other augmenting therapy. And then if we add other stuff like, lumen photon, micropulse, matrix pulse for chronic pain syndromes, or other types of microcurrent or Rife devices, the hyperbaric oxygen, I think, is like number 2 right after the Nutrimeds. It's amazing.
Yes, it is, and our customers love it.
Now, the cost is so simple, too. We're coming up in April next year to tax day, and I tell people we will provide you all the documentation, all your supplements are covered by your taxes, and also the cost of your chamber. The chamber is not only the best pricing in the first place, but you can also lease the chambers here in America. And either way, you can completely write it off, so it doesn't really cost you anything. Now that President Trump is in, he's going to set up health savings account. So you're going to get first dollar total write-off, not just partial write-off, of the cost of your chamber. So I would tell people, if you are an elite athlete or if you have serious health problems, whether you're diabetic and don't want to get neuropathy, or you're in heart failure, or you've had post-chemotherapy and you have a post-chemo brain, or you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, you have to get a hyperbaric Summit to C chamber. If you had MS and you think, well, I'm going to recover just taking the supplements, and I have one gentleman that's on the supplements and he's taking our peptides from Europe, he needs to be in a chamber. Now, he can go, and he's back and forth overseas, and you can get into a hyperbaric chamber, let's say, at 3 atmospheres. It's not necessary, but you have to get in daily. You can't just get in twice a week and get the same effect as, say, 2 hours daily in a mild hyperbaric chamber. You need to get in there. And the nice thing about an ergonomic chamber is you don't have the personal negatives that make you make all kinds of excuses why, I don't know if I want to get in there today, maybe tomorrow. And the maybe tomorrow crowd means they're not going to get the treatment they need every day, which they need to have every day to have the biological effects to recover. And you've dealt with that, because it's like you're trying to be a closer. You're saying, hey, you don't get better by looking at, say, the treadmill when you need to do your treadmill exercises and you hang your clothes on the treadmill. You get better by going on the treadmill. Well, the same thing with these devices. If you're not using hyperbaric oxygen every day, you're not going to speed the healing or heal as much or as quickly or as far as if you're in the chamber every day.
Yeah, I found that out in college. If I put my physics book under my pillow, I didn't wake up the next morning knowing physics. It's the same thing. If you look at your chamber, you're not going to wake up feeling better.
Right. You know what's really bizarre that I find is that people think that getting well is a wishful thing. And it really takes specific action, but you have to take intelligent action. It may not be dangerous action. For example, most specialists will just say, well, we have a small bailiwick of toxic drugs we're going to give you for disease modification. And if that fails, you're just a bad patient. I take it a different view. It means that if I fail it, I didn't take all the parameters of why the person was sick, I didn't fix the underlying cause of the disease, I tried to control the symptoms with powerful, dangerous drugs. Now, what we do is we don't push drugs at all. We recommend technology, diagnostics, and the integration of functional medicine intermediate metabolites through Nutrimeds and technology like hyperbaric oxygen, lumen photon, etc. And we get remarkable healing. I mean, I can turn off autoimmune disease without one disease-modifying drug, but I tell people, now that we've turned it off, we've got to stimulate your stem cells. The most powerful stimulant is hyperbaric oxygen. We've got to get oxygen in there so the tissues have enough energy to detoxify. If you're going to regenerate tissue, you have to have the electron density in the cytochromes, and one of the most powerful ways to make a tissue alkaline, which gets rid of pathogens, is to simply oxygenate it. So there's so many things that happen when you get oxygen to deep tissues, but Henry's law means you've got to dissolve it in the tissue using hyperbaric oxygen. Now, utero is 1.2 atmospheres. So I tell people, you're not a fetus, but fetuses heal. For example, they did a recent release in the news about a little baby that had a tumor. They operated on the baby outside the mommy's uterus, opening up the amniotic sac. They put the baby back into the amniotic sac because the umbilical cord was not cut. The baby not only survived, but afterward there was no scar. So they removed the tumor, reimplanted the baby after they removed the tumor from the baby, put the baby back in the mom's uterus and amniotic sac, and delivered the baby a little bit early, but still healthy, and not even scar on the body. And I tell people, hyperbaric oxygen is like that. And it's something you want to do the rest of your life. So if you've got, let's say, previous cancer and you want to prevent it from returning, or you've got MS and you don't want to have another attack, or you've got autoimmune disease and you don't want the disease to take off and explode in your body, you need to be in hyperbaric oxygen. It's so simple, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
What I do after my show is
usable.
I get in the chamber after the show, and I'll take my laptop in there. I can answer people's email, and they don't even know I'm in the chamber at 1.3 atmospheres, perhaps listening to music at the same time that I'm answering their email. And it's
tell your audience if they have one of our chambers and they want to call me for help on anything, call around 8 in the morning, because that's when I'm in my chamber, and I'll get them a better answer.
Yeah, that's 8 Central Time, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and your number is 612-325-8243. And by the way, if you go to the link on our main website, there'll be hyperlinks, so they'll know that the referral came from us. We've got some really pleased people. Not only the vets, in fact, one recent gentleman bought a chamber for himself, but also for his veterinary patients. And there's a couple of other spin-offs of the chamber. The first one is, I'd like to see you license hyperbaric cafes. So when people land in an airport and they're at 5,000 to 8,000 feet, most airplanes are like at 8,000 feet in terms of the inside the cabin of the aircraft. So you can make people reoxygenate their brains after they've been traveling for hours at 8,000 feet. Number 2, I'd like to see hyperbaric mass units, so that the military has mass unit hyperbaric chamber tents that can have an airlock, and they can actually link these all together and have a mass unit for burns and trauma and so on, so the trauma victim immediately is getting oxygenated. I'd like to see hyperbaric spas, and spa can be hooked up in a regular conventional building, or can be even hooked up and set up underneath water, because basically chambers are going to be under 10 feet of water. I'd like
exactly,
to see,
and they have deep sea hotels now,
right?
That you are pressurized.
I'd like to see hyperbaric helicopters for emergency mass evacuation, because when you get at higher altitude, if you've got somebody who's already, let's say, a major bleed or trauma, you don't want to lower their perfusion pressure and their oxygenation. You want to maintain that. The same way as we need hyperbaric ambulances. So when you get in the ambulance, they should be able to very quickly get it up to 1.3 atmospheres. So while they're doing CPR on you, or while they're giving you, let's say, blood expansion products, etc., or just Ringer's lactate, that you're getting oxygenated, so you're less likely to get more than just a golden hour. Maybe you have a golden hour and a half or 2 hours. And I'd like to see burn units where the entire burn unit is hyperbaric. I want to see hyperbaric, let's say, greenhouses, ones that are maybe small enough to put in your window. So you want to grow super plants. You could literally have a hyperbaric chamber where you also had a cylinder to put up 1,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide, because if you had our special mineral chaperones like indium and iridium, and these minerals now are being resonantly infused into the tissues of the plant you're trying to grow, you're going to have higher mineral and vitamin content. And because of the hypercarbic, hyperbaric situation, they're going to grow 10 times faster than normal food. You'll have grapes the size of grapefruit. You'll have tomatoes that'll have incredible color and vitamin content. And a lot of people don't realize if they're a prepper, having a mild hyperbaric greenhouse is simply taking a chamber, let's say for a pet, and modifying it to just add a cylinder for CO2. It's that simple. So
exactly, and
you can have
you could have a track team in there running in circles, generating CO2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's another thing. We could have hyperbaric gymnasiums or exercise rooms where the entire room is basically a hyperbaric chamber. Hyperbaric exercise. Imagine people doing hyperbaric, yoga and exercise. What kind of market would there be? There'd be a huge market. People say, well, I want to have a 20 by 30 hyperbaric chamber. Maybe you use what I call like Lego blocks that can interlock together and would create enough of a seal that just by its mechanics it would actually create an increasing seal as the pressure went up. So it wouldn't have more leaks, it would actually be a tighter seal.
Recently they took down the largest hyperbaric chamber in the world. It was called the Metrodome, where the Vikings played. It had a canvas roof that was lifted by air pressure. And the interesting thing is, just before the end of the game, they would super pressurize the chamber, the Metrodome, because when people left, they get blown out of the building through the open doors, letting all the air out.
That's too funny. So
there'd be a catcher outside the door to catch hats.
Oh, you're kidding? That's funny. A catcher to catch hats. That's pretty funny. So yeah, these are very doable, aren't they?
Yes.
In fact,
absolutely.
when I talked to Ron Klatz, who's the head and founder of A4M, American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, and our vision of a research spa laboratory stem cell clinic for life extension would be in Encinitas, just south of the border of San Diego and Mexico, about 70 miles south of Tijuana, along the coast in a beautiful area. And it would be an underwater facility that would have laboratory, surgical facilities, and spa. And you could go in there for a week or a month, and we would do everything to put you into what's called epigenetic field therapy rooms. The entire facility would be mild hyperbaric. You'd go in there and check in, and you'd be staying there for, say, days, weeks, or a month or more. And you do everything from stem cell therapies to detoxification to whatever, and all of it would be mild hyperbaric. That's where I see things going. Mild hyperbaric needs to penetrate our culture. And by the way, it is in China. 80% of the hyperbaric chambers on the planet are in China. Interesting. But they don't have good quality mild hyperbaric chambers. Here at Nutrimedical, Dr. Bill Deagle, 888-212-8871. You can call Bruce directly as well at the Summit to See. Either get Bruce or his wife, Judy, 612-325-8243. 612-325-8243. Or you can go to the direct link on our front of Nutrimedical, which shows you the Summit to See chambers, or under the product line, you can actually take the hyperlink. That'll also send them a cookie so they'll know the referral came from us. So do tell them that you're referred by here at Nutrimedical. I'd like to see all these innovations at some time rather than the next, say, decade happen so your company becomes a leading company for mild hyperbarics in every aspect, whether it's a hyperbaric cafe or mass units. You mentioned on the break even cutting apart an old aircraft. You can create a central airlock and actually have a whole bunch of these, if you want to call it like mass units or operating rooms, take all the seats out of an aircraft, large aircraft, and turn it into an operating room. Pretty easy, hey?
Yes, it is. And you could, combine them together so you would have like the equivalent of a wing in a hospital. With
exactly, pretty cool.
10, 20, 30 of these.
Yeah, I also have another idea, and I threw this out I think last year. The idea you can create a almost like a Lego block thing, an airlock Lego block, where these blocks could be put in almost any configuration possible, like Legos, and they would create a hyperbaric room or a hyperbaric building, and you could actually snap them together, and they would create an expanding seal, literally on the very basis that the pressure would actually seal them. And I'm